had touchdown. Can anyone hear me? Please copy. Mom, do we have any methylated spirits?
What? What are you wearing, George?
The spaceman needs it.
Well, the spaceman can make do with water.
Yeah, we saw the Omega Man the other night. Pretty bloody average.
Hello, little Will, how you going?
Geez, you're growing up fast. I mean, he's supposed to be a scientist, right? And he's walking around looking at his chook in his pandemic.
Exactly. Back to your bloody microscope, you know what I mean?
Smell like bees.
I know, that's my special perfume. But the missus liked it. You liked it, didn't you?
What's not to like about a Charlton Heston?
Dad, can I go on an adventure, please?
Yes, love, of course you can. Off you go. They should make that. You know, they should make it in India.
Oh my God, he still likes me. He still likes me.
Still your husband. I tell you, any time there's a blackout, I feel so powerless. Just someone try and remind me where the fuse box is. Do we even have a fuse? What is a fuse box again? It is this way. It's this way. Gentlemen, I give you the video sphere.
Where's the demo, was that?
PowerPoint's over there.
Yeah?
Warren, can you go and see what that mutt is barking at?
Yeah, just a minute, but why isn't it bloody...
Warren, the dog, please.
Would you just let me finish?
George? George! Georgie!
We're upside down.
Georgie! Warren, she's gone!
Right?
Hey everyone! With all of the excitement of Unreal Engine 5, we want to take a moment to recognize the incredible contributions from you, the Unreal community. Enjoy the latest community sizzle packed with amazing projects in film production, to games, to animation, and beyond. Watch the full video on the Unreal Engine YouTube channel. Ever wanted to fly a broom or fight a dragon? Well, now you can. With WeVR's new virtual reality experiences for the Harry Potter store, anyone can make their own magic firsthand. Discover how the team created interactive spellcasting and broom flight systems in our latest interview on the Unreal Engine feed. And speaking of dragons, the talented team at indie studio Playwing have created a dogfighting flight game like no other. In the team-based competitive multiplayer Century Age of Ashes, jump into the saddle of a fire-breathing dragon to battle enemies, swoop through castles, nosedive down tunnels, and take evasive action to shake off pursuers in the process. Soar over to the feed to find out how the team finessed the aerial ballet of flying a dragon and the inspiration for the game. Popping over to our community spotlights, this week we're kicking off with a quaint countryside cottage from Royston Boothello. Created with a variety of DCC tools, they used this opportunity to dive into UE4 to learn about shaders, lighting, blueprints, and more. Head over to their ArtStation page to let them know what you think. Here we have a beautiful interior environment from Vasanth on Boo. They could have fooled us when they revealed it was their first UE project. Stroll over to the forums to give them your feedback and props. And last up, we have Heartland, a lovely short film and PowerRay's first UE5 project. After learning the basics of development for a few months, they leveraged free marketplace and Quixel assets to build the project. Pop into the forums to check it out. Thanks for watching this week's News and Community Spotlight.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Inside Unreal, a weekly show where we learn, explore, and celebrate everything Unreal. I am your host, Tina, and today with me I have two incredible guests, Russell Paul and Ryan Schmidt, here to talk with us today a little bit about the geometry tools in UE5. So starting off, let's get to know our guests a little bit more. Russell, would you like to tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. Happy to be here, first of all. I'm Russell Paul, Senior Technical Product Manager. I'm focused on geometry tools, modeling tools, as well as helping out with the automotive industry as well in my spare time, which I don't get that much of. But I've been modeling for, oh my God, almost like 30 years now. I started in the early 90s learning Alias, which was one of the early modeling packages. And then I spent a good long time modeling for visual effects production before joining Epic about 3 years ago, and been working with Ryan on modeling tools and geometry tools, for a couple years now. And version 5 is sort of a giant leap forward for us. So looking forward to sharing it with everyone.
Yeah, absolutely. It's incredible, just the increase in features and tools and the stuff that's available now. It is absolutely mind-blowing. But now, Ryan, would you like to tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. Hi. Yeah. Also super excited to be doing this. So I'm Ryan Schmidt. I'm an engineering fellow of geometry on the Unreal Engine team here at Epic. So I've been at Epic for about 3.5 years, and I came to start these things we're going to talk to you about. So I came here to sort of start up this initiative to build 3D modeling tools into Unreal Editor. And then recently have been started to do geometry scripting for Unreal Engine 5.0, which we'll talk about in the second half of the stream here. I previously worked at Autodesk on some software called Mesh Mixer. And basically I've been trying to figure out for quite a long time how to build these kind of tools into game engines and editors. So it's super exciting for me that it's sort of happening, and that, all the people watching this are going to go off and use it afterwards. Definitely, for sure. Please do.
Please do. Use the cool things that they have worked
That's
so
right.
hard on. All right, well, we'll kick it off with Russell here. Do you want to explain a little bit about what you're going to walk through?
Sure. I think if you want to swap over to my screen, I can. We'll get going. So first, obviously, the first thing we're going to do is I'm in just a vanilla UE5, just from the launcher, just so everybody knows we're not showing anything special here. So, but just want to give everybody an overview of the modeling tools. And just kind of walk through sort of the basics. There's a ton of modeling tools that are available, and there's no way that we're going to get through all of these. But want to just give everybody kind of a little introduction so they can get in the package and have some fun. So first things, just so everybody knows, you do need to turn on the plugin. If it is loaded automatically with some of the templates, but if you don't see the modeling tools under here. Under the mode for modeling, you might want to just check and make sure. So I'll just go to the plugins and look for the modeling tools editor mode. You can also turn on the static mesh editor modeling mode. That's going to add a subset of the tools to the static mesh editor. And then the other thing that we're going to look at today is there's a new, it's still tagged as experimental, but a standalone sort of UV editor. So we'll talk about that just a little bit today as well. So you might want to turn that plugin on, and just to help Ryan out as well. There is the plugin for, let me see if I can get here. So there is a geometry script plugin that Ryan's going to go over, but just want to make sure that you have kind of all those turned on. Once those are all turned on, you'll get this modeling palette right over here with all these really, really fun modeling tools. And so we'll start to dive into some of those. So, modeling mode is relatively new. It's been around for the past couple of releases, but it's really come to fruition in this version. And if you're coming at this from non-modeling background and you're just jumping into Unreal, great. If you come from another background, a couple of things to keep in mind: that we're working with static meshes most of the time, and that's what I'm going to be focused on today. So you want to keep track of managing the meshes as you're building them. And so one thing that to take a look at is this little area down here at the bottom left. And that actually keeps track of, one thing to look at is what LOD you're working on. So if you want to work on a specific LOD of something, you can actually switch that one then. But what's really important is understanding where your meshes are and your elements that you're creating go. So there's this new asset location. I clicked on the little gear icon just so that you can bring up some of the other options. You can turn off or on, and you can look through these at a time. I've specified a specific path, just called meshes _ RTP, just so that I know anything new that I'm creating is going to get placed into my content folder, and then I have a meshes RTP. So anything new I create is going to get dropped into that folder. So just a little bit of housekeeping for everybody. The final thing is, so this little scene that I have here is just a project I made. I just said new project. I said games, and I grabbed the vehicle template because I thought it'd be fun to try and actually do something in a space, as opposed to just looking at pushing and pulling spheres around. So this is just this little game template, and then I went out to the good old marketplace, and I grabbed this automotive salt flats environment, which is kind of a nice little space, and I just merged it into this this scene so that I can have my vehicles. So when I hit play, I can actually have my car, and I can drive him around on the wide open salt flats. And of course, so what that did is that kind of inspired me that maybe what we should do is sort of this is a Rocket League car anyway, so maybe we'll just show off some of the modeling tools by thinking like, what if we go ahead and start making some Rocket League obstacles or things to do? So I'll kind of run through some of the tools in that spirit. So up at the top left here, basic shapes. Let's just grab a quick box. This is different than the older style place box. We have a lot of options here for size, subdivisions, polygroups. We'll cover polygroups a little bit more as time goes on, but these are a really useful concept that we can have. So I'm just going to drop a little box in here, say complete, just to drop it into space. Let's give it a better material. Since this is starting with a template, we have these nice sort of basic materials. And of course, this is just these meshes come in, and there's an option for, if they have physics control. So for instance, if I was to drive, into it, so which is not very helpful. But let's I think what we need to have is we need to obviously, I have this beach ball that I kind of made earlier, so we're going to make a little ramp. So there's a couple of different ways that you can edit this. Let's do the first one here, which is everything in Unreal is a triangulated mesh. So there's actually, if you really want to just edit triangles, you can just go ahead and grab these triangle edit, and you can actually interact directly with the triangles and move them around if you wanted to, or edges. So if we wanted to sort of make a really, really sort of, crazy steep ramp here, so this is all sort of stuff that I think a lot of people might be familiar with. This is just editing the triangles directly, and then we can say accept. And once again, what I've found really fun about this whole concept and having the modeling tools in here is this idea that I can actually, craft and kind of come up and conceptualize ideas and things directly in the space where I want to be. So I'm not actually having to, think about stuff in Maya or Blender or other packages. I can just kind of come up with these kind of crazy ideas directly here. But obviously, this is a pretty boring ramp. let's go ahead and try and make it a little bit nicer. So I'm going to jump over to the other set of tools, and this is called Poly Edit. And it's actually short for Poly Group Edit, not for Polygon Edit, which is a little sort of deceiving. But when I have this mesh and then I select Poly Edit, you see that I get this whole set of new tools that I can work on and utilize. So for instance, if I was to grab, and what it is this group is the collection of the triangles that were there. So I actually, each one of these faces is a group. So I can grab this little group right here. I could actually say like extrude that out, if I wanted to. Or because these groups are actually structured like a square, a quad, we can actually kind of mimic sort of some classic quad-based modeling tools like insert edge loops if we wanted to. So we can just go ahead and then I'm going to say I'm done inserting some edge loops. Let's make this ramp a little bit more interesting. So we were talking earlier about watching people modeling and how exciting that could be. And now here I am just modeling, and you get to watch how exciting it is for me to be doing that. So we'll say accept.
This is
all right.
exciting.
So we got a little bit better ramp. Let's see if we can jump and hit our ball over here. So let's do this here. See if we can. All right, look at that. Should build a wall back there eventually because that ball's just going to keep rolling for endless,
into infinity.
Yeah, I actually had this idea of building like a little stadium arena and all stuff, but I was like, oh, I got like 30 minutes. I can't, anyway. So, of course, this is great. This is sort of a fun little blocking thing, but one of the things that is really great about these tools is, and what's going on with some of the other integrations into UE5 is how far you can take some of this kind of stuff. So let's say since we're out in the middle of the desert, I kind of was thinking maybe we can do a little Burning Man kind of thing. So I think what we need to have is, I'm going to grab another cube here and let's complete this guy. And instead of it being sort of just this plain gray thing here, let's make something, let's say 2x4 by sort of really thin thing like this, a little bit thinner. Obviously, I've gone in and I've tweaked my scale values. So there's, let's go ahead and bake the scale so that we just have a regular 1-to-1 scale on this one. I don't need to bake rotation. I'll turn that off. And let's see, what else do we need to do this? Well, we probably want to round the edges. So there is a bevel tool in here. So I'm going to just grab that guy. I'll say Poly Edit. I'm going to just grab the edges real quick, just so that we can, and I'll say Edge Bevel. That's a pretty significant bevel. Just turn that way down, just to give a little bit of an edge in here. And we'll say Accept. And then I need to give this a little bit better texture. But before that, there's some UV tools down here. There's some really, really great automatic UV tools. I would definitely say explore some of these options. The auto UV tool, especially when you have really complex meshes, if you bring in like a sculpt or something like that, there's some really great automatic unwrap tools that are in here. But we're just going to grab the sort of the basic project. I'm going to do a box projection, and let's just say basic, box like this, and we'll say accept. Now, obviously, I don't know what the heck this looks like. I don't have any of these, so this is where we would go in and jump in and say under Asset Tools, and then I'll say UV Editor. And so now we can actually have a nice little UV Editor area here. So let's just turn on our checker pattern just so we can kind of see what's going on. And there's some tools in here. This is brand new, so we're still building up the tool set in here, but there's definitely some useful tools for sewing and splitting, or for go ahead and solving islands, for unwrapping an island with a, but we can also have some basic things in here for like, hey, let's just kind of lay things out and sort of pack them together so that we can have a better packing of all the pieces. So, those are useful as well. So let's just make sure that what we have is, turn that checker pattern back on. I want to make sure that the top and the bottom have lots and lots of space. So there's this little menu up here at the top where I can select individual islands. So if I want to grab, specific spots, I can go ahead and say, let's just, move this around. I think that's the bottom. Nope, that must be the side. This is the fun part of me going like, which part of this guy do I have?
It's always the challenge with UVs.
Yeah, UVs are definitely a love-hate relationship with things. It's like everybody like loves them and then hates them at the same time. So, but it must be this one. There we go. So let's just grab that guy here and this guy here. So let's just rotate those guys around just so we can move those guys a little bit. Make them a little bit bigger just so they take up more space. And we'll just say that that's done. I don't want to waste everybody's time me doing UVs, but we need to give that a better texture. So, of course, in case you haven't noticed, one of the awesomest things that came in lately is you can actually launch the Quixel Bridge directly from the editor now. So if you wanted to add stuff in here, you can actually just click on Quixel Bridge. And what's great about that is you can just go ahead and find all sorts of stuff in here, whether it's 3D models or textures. So if I was like looking for plywood, but there's all sorts of surfaces here for plywood. So I just grabbed this sort of old plywood, downloaded it, added it to the space. And now that I have, that here in my Megascans directory, surfaces, just go to old plywood, drag and drop that on. So now we have some plywood. Now I want to make a nice kind of smooth ramp, but obviously this was just a basic cube. So let's go ahead and go back to Polyedit. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the edge loop insert again, but this time instead of using just a single cut, because I know I want to make this ramp sort of a nice little curved shape so that our car can be a little better. Let's go to even. Let's give it say 4 sections. There we go. So now we can curve that. And now let's go ahead and make another couple copies of it. We don't want repeating, so let's just rotate this guy by repeating texture here. I noticed that my pivot point wasn't centered between those guys. So let's just go ahead and center the pivot. And you'll notice that since these are all instances of the same one, they're all going to shift a little bit. So, which is expected because since they're all instances, when I adjust the pivot of the first one, the second and third one will actually adjust their pivot, so let's just go ahead and all to the same space. So now we have a nice starting point here, but of course, what we need to do is we need to support our ramp with some structure. So once again, I'd gone into the Megascans directory and grab some 3D assets. Let's just grab this wooden beam here. Because we can't have our plywood floating in space because that just wouldn't be physically correct now, would it? So.
My plywood always floats in space. I don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah, I know. It's I don't know. It depends on how physically accurate we want to be. I think, let's say it's somewhat okay. I didn't type in my rotation values perfectly, so this is the thing, trying to remember, type in everything perfectly. That's just pretty good. Go ahead and move those over. We have support on both sides. Now, of course, what we want to do is we need to make sort of some shape out of this, but these are all instances of each other, and this is something to keep in mind as you're modeling in here. If I was to go ahead and say, take this one piece of plywood and bend it, all the other ones are all looking at the same mesh. So what we want to do is we don't want that to happen. We don't want to be able to bend each one individually. So one thing in a situation like this that is actually kind of an easy thing to do is I'm actually going to grab all of these parts, and I'm going to go over and I'm going to use the mesh merge tool. And this gives you a couple of different options. One is, so I'm going to make a new object, and I'm going to call it, ramp top. So I have it. And then the output type is whether or not you want to make a static mesh, derive it from the input. You can also make volumes and dynamic meshes too. I think Ryan will talk a little bit more about dynamic mesh. I'm going to focus on static mesh. And then you can decide what you want to do with the inputs. So I'm actually going to delete the inputs. Actually, I'm going to hide the inputs. So that's all the input meshes. And if I say accept, what I have now is I now have one mesh that represents everything there. So now this is helpful because now I can go ahead and it's just one mesh that I can work with. So now I can go ahead and say, oh, what I want to do now is I want to just go ahead and grab a lattice. So let's just, go ahead and say, too many. Interpolation chart cubic. And then once again, you get to watch me move points around to make some shape that I want. Oh no, miss some points. So we can keep. I could, like I said, if we had more time of the day, I could spend all sorts of time just playing with this to make sure that the shape of my ramp is perfect. But let's just say something like that's looking pretty good. Say accept. And so now let's move this ramp out of the way. It's kind of a chintzy little ramp. We don't want it anymore. All right. So it's looking pretty good. Let's hit play, see if we can jump. See how this jump works. Oh. Anyway, well, the ramp was good.
You still hit the ball, so
I still hit the ball, which is all I was looking for. But obviously, since I talked about being physically correct, one thing that we don't have here is we don't have any supports for this guy. So let's go ahead and I'm going to grab that beam again. And so far, all I've been doing is literally just grabbing these pixel pieces and sticking them in here. I haven't been doing anything to modify them other than a lattice, but you can do actually all sorts of things. But in order to do them properly, one thing that we want to do is same reason that I had up here with the plywood. I want to make sure that I am not doing things that is going to affect any instances of it. So for instance, I have this one beam, and I know I'm going to need to cut this beam in order to not pass all the way through. So I'm going to actually duplicate this mesh. And this is not just an instance. It's not just making a copy here. It's actually making a copy in my asset folder that I'm going to use later. So I'm going to make a copy of it. I'm going to keep my input so that I can use it later. And then let's just rotate this guy, say maybe 45 degrees. So we can support it. And then I'm going to do that again. So same thing, except that. And let's just rotate that. Maybe like, actually, let's rotate that all the way. Let's say 90. Try not to spend all day modeling, which I could do, but let's do one more, just because. So stack that guy up here. So that's looking pretty decent here. So we got these things, but obviously they're passing through each other, which is not really what we want. So I'm just going to go grab one of these guys, and there's a bunch of editing tools here that you can work with. So plane cut is a really helpful one, especially when doing something like this. So I'm just going to drag this guy down, give it a little bit of a cut. Let's do the same thing to this one. Except for this one, obviously we have a couple more things we need to do. So go up here. So instead of a single cut, I'm going to click on the cut option right there. And then I'm going to say flip the plane so that way I can actually cut a couple more times. So cut it right there. Let's say cut, and then we'll rotate. So now,
this is blowing my mind.
So
that's incredible.
So it's let's do this last one over here, and
Russell, you should show the control clicking, maybe.
Oh, okay, yeah. Oh, here.
It's too late now, but.
Oh, at least I wasn't able to undo that one.
I don't know if it'll help actually for these cuts, but.
Yeah, I don't know if it'll help. Yeah. Anyway. So, okay, we'll just do that one. What is cool about this one, though, is what is nice, like it filled in this gap here up at the top here. There's a piece of wood, but this is where sometimes we don't see it, so I wasn't really going to worry about it. But this is actually a perfect time where I could go here and I can say Asset Tools and jump over to the UV editor here, and let's say display background and material. This is beam texture. And beam texture. And then what I want to do is find that new thing that he made up there. So let's drag that around so that we actually can give that some proper end grain as opposed to what it was before. We can say apply. You should see. So now we actually have some proper end grain on there. That's good. All right. Not that you can see it, but modelers are like that. We get all sort of, see about that kind of stuff. Pivot, center that, just so I can drag it over there a little bit more. Because want to make sure that had proper end grain on there. Now, you know what? The last thing this thing needs is this all stuff is not nailed together in any way, shape, or form. So, as I was kind of putting this together, I was trying to think of like, what are some things and mixing and matching and adapting different tools. And so obviously one thing we want to do now is we're going to use some of those poly editing tools to make some brackets to put some things together. My favorite, most used tool in modeling packages, we're just going to say box here. Just make a area down here. And I'm going to just jump into poly edit, and I'm going to turn on faces so I can grab this face. There's different selection techniques and marquee selection. So if you select, you could select vertices or whatever. Zoom in on that guy. Zoomed in super close here. There is a method to my madness, trust me. So okay, so then let's grab this guy here. I'm going to use the push-pull tool here. Maybe I'll go out a little bit further, and then grab this guy here. And what we need to do is, let's go ahead and insert a quick edge loop. Not that many. So the other thing that I didn't mention in here that to keep in mind is so that there's insertion mode. And there's two different ways that you can do it. One is plane cut, and the other one is retriangulate. And retriangulate can be really helpful on your mesh if it's going to stay sort of in these nice sort of square polygroups, because what it'll do is it'll keep, and you can turn on the triangle here. So it might be hard to see. But so plane cut is actually going to cut the existing triangles with, and so you'll have the existing triangles plus whatever new triangles are needed, whereas retriangulate will actually give you sort of nice clean triangles, so you end up with sort of just 2 triangles per one of these polygroups, which can be really helpful for doing a lot of stuff. So let's just grab those guys, move them over, grab this face right here, extrude that out a little bit. So we got a nice little L bracket that's going to hold our ramp edge together here. Let's go ahead and just grab that guy, go back to our UVs. We'll just do another quick box projection. Let's see what sort of fun materials I grabbed. Rusty black metal. Throw that on there. So now we have, a little bracket. Oh, I think what we need just to help tie this all together is we probably need some bolts. So let's just throw a couple quick little bolts in here. That's way, way too big. So let's see. Let's go ahead and I'm just going to grab the edges. Actually, you know what? I did some little mistake here. So there's 2 options or a couple options when you're making your primitives, or your shapes. One is to have the groups being created in different ways. So you can see here when I go to poly edit, I have one poly group that's the entire outside edge versus the entire inside edge, or the top and the bottom. And that's not really what I want. What I want is I want a poly group for each one of these sides. So inside the any one of the shapes, there's this polygroup mode, and I'll say instead of per face, I'm going to say per quad. So let's just drop that one in here. And now when I go to poly edit, you'll see the difference. So now I have a poly group for each one of these sections here. So in this particular case, that's going to be super useful, because what I want to do is I'm going to go ahead and say select all the edges of this guy. And then I'm going to do a bevel on all these edges. And then we'll say apply that. And now I have little poly groups for all the new bevels. I'm going to grab it again. And let's just do another bevel. Make it a little bit smaller. So we have a sort of faking a little bit of a round here. So now I have my shape here. A little middle as well. Probably need to have, just going to fake in a little bit of a bolt on there. Instead of 8, so let's just do 12 sections. And oh, forgot to drop it. There we go. Put these 2 together. So of course, a lot of work just for these little details, but I like all the little
They're
details.
important.
they are important. They give, all that little texture. So I'm just going to do a quick boolean and say union these guys together. And of course, it gave me a duplicate material. So now we have two of the same material on here, which is an excellent opportunity to show that you can actually go ahead and go to, there's an option here for material edit. So what we want to do is I'm going to grab, basically, I'm going to say select all, and I'm going to say I want everything to be this material and say assign active material. And then for the second material insert, I'm going to delete that guy. So now I'm going to say accept. And so now we've gone ahead and we've deleted this material on here, which is, obviously going to be helpful for, being a little bit more efficient with our assets. And there's all sorts of other things that you can do with that. Let's go down here. Sky 90. Put our little bolts around here. All right. Probably go ahead and combine all these guys together. Get more efficient. Let's just hide the inputs just in case. There you go. So we have these guys that are all set there. So I'm not going to go through and build little panels for every single one of these guys, but I think you guys get the idea of some of the things that you can do in here. But now we have our nice little ramp. We hit play, we can drive and we can, maybe I'll try not to jump. Oh, gee, oh, dang.
Still hit the ball. I'm just saying.
I still hit the ball. Just cool, because that's kind of, I've actually been kind of having a lot of fun with this whole concept, in the sense that I had, as I'm kind of going through this and I was making this ramp, I was trying to think of all the other things I did. I actually tried using, there's some other deformers in here that are actually really, really cool. For instance, like if you wanted to, let's go ahead and there's deformers for doing wraps and twists and things like that. I actually tried to see if I could get the car to like spin around and do like a 360, with some other the warping. There's so many things in here that just all of a sudden, when you start going through some of these tools, you just go, oh my God, I can do that. I can do that. And then there's other things in here that are just sort of really helpful from a production standpoint, doing stuff. So for instance, like right now, this whole, beam section of all these beams right here, they're all different beams, and they're all sourcing this sort of high res 2K mesh. And obviously sometimes that's actually not super efficient. So if we wanted to, what we could do is, I'm going to just go one of the last things here before we turn it over to Ryan, let's go ahead and do what we did before. I'm going to merge all those together, and let's hide the input. And so now we have just a single mesh. And in the UV editor, what we want to do is just to kind of make things a little bit more efficient. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to go to channels, and I'm going to say add a new channel. So now I have two UV channels. So you can preview just channel 0 or channel 1. And let's go ahead back to channels. And what I'm going to say, instead of add, let's say copy my UVs from target is going to be channel 1, source is UV0. So I say apply. So now I have two of the same exact UV channels. But now that we're working the second one, let's just lay these out and let's repack this channel. So now what you have is, UV0 is taking the original UVs from the Quixel sort of material assignment texture. And now I have, UV1 so that I can use that. So, some things that you can do. Let's save that. Okay. Let's hopefully I actually did it. There's a whole bunch of, in addition to the UV tools, there's a whole bunch of also some really cool baking tools. So I'm going to say bake. And there's a bunch of different baking options that we can do in here. For instance, you can say, for instance, like, tangents. If you have two objects, you can do objects. Ambient occlusion, if you want to bake ambient occlusion. Curvature is also a really cool one. But we're going to go here quickly, and I'm going to say texture. And right now it's kind of going like, what the heck is going on? That's what the red little thing is for. But so we're going to say the target mesh is going to be UV1 that we want to have. And then I'm going to not worry about my source map. But my source texture, I'm going to say, is right here. And let's give it that same texture right here. So, and then you can see it's kind of gone soft a little bit, right in this area. So let's just turn up our texture resolution. I'm not going to do super high. Let's just do 1024, just so we can kind of see what's going on. But what's really cool is I've taken all of those other maps, and we are basically going to go ahead and just bake that in. So now in my, it stores it right here. Essentially what we have is, it's called this one right here. It's taken and it's, baked, those 2K maps that was, the same on every single one. And I've sort of baked it into one new map that I can then use. And I could go through, if I wanted to, all the different effects and normals. But, now I have one map that I can use that goes over everything, and every single piece has individual texture space as opposed to overlapping texture space from the original. You could also do things where instead of doing that, you could use the baking tools to bake, for instance, like just instead of doing that, let's turn off texture. You could say, do like a curvature map, so that if you wanted to do some little edge work on here or other things, or ambient occlusion, you can do all sorts of fun stuff like that. And you can do all that directly in the editor as you're sort of playing around to do stuff. So, there's tons and tons of different tools in here. And we haven't even really gotten into data prep or importing data cleanup and things like that. But to me, this is some of the tools to get you kind of get started, get playing around, get making stuff in here. And then the final thing that I did want to sort of mention that's in here, and let's see if I can find it. Where did I put it? Oh, I made it called Sandbox over here. Let's get rid of that. So once again, I did the same sort of beams that we had earlier. I sort of just stacked them up to make a little area. I made a little space in here. There's some fun sculpting tools in here if you wanted to go ahead and have a mesh, and you could actually just say, go ahead and, I have an alpha channel on here. Let's just, no alpha channel. Move things around. But, you can kind of sculpt to your heart's content over here. So now if we say accept, let's say play. Let's see what happens if we drive over there. Oh, whoops. Okay, wait.
Saved it.
I saved it. Oh. I picked the wrong car. So
what this really
anyway,
was you showing your skills as a stunt driver.
stunt driver. Yeah. It's getting slow, I think, because the collision is a complex collision. So I mean, the other thing that you could do, and Ryan can guide me through these things here, is because I'm not good at setting up my collision, is you can actually go ahead and actually do a mesh to collision object here, and let's do
set it to
convex hulls.
Sure, set it to convex hulls, and set it to per input. The next one, input mode there. Set that to per input, per mesh component. See what that does.
See that, and then make sure you turn on append to existing. Correct?
No, in this you probably want to replace them in this case. You might even be able to use boxes for this, but anyway, leave it as convex hulls and see what happens.
Okay, let's see what happens. I was trying to understand collisions earlier last night, and I was like, I need Ryan to explain.
You should have watched my video, Russell.
Oh, yeah. But you can see that it didn't slow down when I hit it, which is awesome, because it gives you the opportunity to make, to actually see what happens when you're making these collisions and make adjustments. The other thing that I didn't really jump into is that a lot of these modeling tools actually work with volumes. So, and even a lot of these shapes. So if you needed to, you can actually create a shape or a volume directly. So if you want to make a blocking volume, and I'm just going to do it the same way. So, and you can have the list of volume types here, and I always prefer to drop that in. And let's just turn off game view so that you can see it. Landscape. Where's my landscape? If you wanted to, you can actually use the same sort of poly edit tools on this guy to actually work directly on this. You could actually add stuff to it. I like the push-pull tool. It's similar to cube grid. It's not as great as the cube grid tool. There's been some other great presentations on cube grid, so I'm not really covering it today. But push-pull also does some of the same stuff. Where if you were to do, see, now I'm getting off topic here, but you can do all sorts of cool stuff with this guy. So like poly edit, grab this guy. Let's insert some edge loops. I don't know what I'm making, but anyway, but if I grab this face and this face, this is what I like about push pull, go like that, and then I can make a shape. So much fun. Anyway, all right. Those are some of the fun things that I have here. There's, like I said, there's so much more to this tool set that we just don't have time to cover today. There's really great deformers. There's the ability to add displacement and bake it into the mesh if you wanted to. There's controls for, obviously, for baking scale and rotation, adjusting your pivot points. There's also simplification and remeshing tools or welding tools for cleaning up meshes. There's so much in here. But I think what I was hoping today is just to kind of give you guys a little taste of how much fun you can have just being creative directly in here, modeling, editing, mixing together Quixel assets or stuff that you've brought in, editing them, adding to them, and really crafting experiences directly in the editor without having to jump around to any place else. You can just do a ton of stuff and actually take and build out some really sort of interesting geometry and some really final shapes and things directly in Unreal now. So with that, I think I'll turn it over to Ryan.
Yeah, that sounds incredible. I do have to mention, I don't know if either of you saw, but chat absolutely lost its mind when you used the cut tool. We were all just all in sync of, oh my God, what did we just watch happen?
Yeah, it's some of people, the devs on the team, have put in different places ability to like do some of these operations together from different tools, like the thing Russell just showed where he just pulled the face through the thing. We didn't have that for a long time, and I actually have a video on my YouTube channel about workarounds for not having that and like ways to kind of do it. And then we just added that, and it's just like, it's so awesome. You just be like boop, and you make a hole or a window or a door. Yeah, it's good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Ryan, do you want to jump in and we can answer questions later? Do you want to?
Yeah, sure. Okay. So we could just switch to my screen, I guess. So I've made some slides. You invite someone who used to be a sort of an academic person into your live stream, you're going to get some slides. It's just going to be to help me explain some things, and then I'm mostly going to do demos, so don't worry. But what we're going to talk about is geometry scripting. So all that stuff Russell just showed you is all our modeling mode. It's kind of like interactive tools, pointy clicky type tools, and there's been people asking in the chat. I've been watching it, and immediately when we started working on this, people started asking like, can we script this? Can we, use blueprints with those tools and things like that? And we haven't gone that route currently. But what we did is basically all those tools are built on a geometry library, a C++ like geometry processing library, we call it. That's like the mesh and like the operations, like a boolean and stuff like that. And so what we've done is we've exposed those operations and those mesh objects and stuff like that to blueprints. And so that's geometry scripting. And so so basically I'm gonna, for the next half hour or so, talk about geometry scripting and show some demos. So this is completely new in 5.0. If you looked into modeling in UE before, the modeling tools have actually been around for a couple of years now, but not anywhere close to what we have now in 5.0. But geometry scripting is a totally new thing, and we've used it. If you watch the sort of UE5 release event, there was a demo of kind of some doing some stuff in the Lyra project, and that was all done with this geometry scripting. Sort of the person doing the demo made a wall and with a window in it and some stairs and stuff like that. And so I will show a little bit of that at the end. But so let's sort of high level, what's geometry scripting? So what it is, it's just a library of U functions for doing stuff with meshes. So you can generate meshes, you can modify them, you can query them. The functions are blueprint functions. They also work in Python. I'll just mention a bit about that at the end. Most of the stuff I'm going to show works both in editor and at runtime. I'll try and call out stuff that's editor only. That mostly has to do with things like creating assets. And a little bit, we have some sub-D. Russell didn't show any sub-D, but we do have some sub-D operations, and those are currently editor only because of a dependency on a third-party library that doesn't work on all platforms. And basically, this builds on other new UE5 features like dynamic mesh and dynamic mesh component, dynamic mesh actors, and I'll talk a little bit about that when we get into more the sort of, I'm going to talk a bit about the technical underpinnings of this geometry scripting. This is experimental stuff in UE 5.0. So modeling mode was experimental for a few years, and now we're sort of considering it to be beta. Modeling tools, Russell didn't really mention this aspect, but when you edit a static mesh, you're not really introducing any dependency on the modeling tool. So when you click accept on that tool and the static mesh is updated, you could go turn off modeling mode and that static mesh is still there. It's all fine. So geometry scripting is a plugin that when you use it, you're going to become, if you have a geometry script blueprint, it's going to be dependent on the geometry script plugin. So because it's experimental, it's not enabled by default. So Russell showed you how to turn this plugin on. It's geometry script plugin, but you have to go turn that on in a project where you want to use this. And I'll just mention, so I'm going to do some tutorials, but similar to how modeling takes some time, wiring up blueprints takes some time. And to be honest, I'm not an expert at it. I mostly do C++ programming. And so I do make videos that I've been posting on YouTube of like short demos of things. So I'll just show that channel if you want to look it up. That's my Ryan Schmidt Epic is my account there. And you can find a playlist of geometry script videos. And I'll just show, oh, I guess that's showing all the views and stuff. Well, anyway, whatever. I don't know if there's any secret account and stuff in there. I guess you can pause it later and find out. But I wanted to show, oh, that's right. So I've posted some here we go. So I've posted modeling videos in this, oh no, that's other people's modeling videos. There's a lot of those on Twitter. These are on YouTube. These are my modeling videos. I'm getting there. And so this was all mostly done in 4.2.6. I made a few modeling videos, and then we made one for the early access about basically taking 3D scans and turning them into sort of usable assets. All using modeling mode, the stuff Russell showed. So for instance, I mentioned a video there when he was trying to set up the collision. So this UE426 creating simple collision using modeling mode is a video all about the tool that Russell used for setting up simple collision. And this is the one I mentioned about making windows and doors. So this video is basically obsolete now because of that push-pull thing that Russell showed that took 1 second. You don't have to watch this half-hour video anymore. So problem solved. Okay. And then those videos are also the geometry script stuff. We're also posting on our new Epic sort of development community. So my account there, I'm RMSEG, and if you find me or search for geometry script, you'll find the same videos that I was posting on YouTube here. And you can even get things like the sample code. So this is the Python one. Python, I believe I posted the Python script here for this video, which does booleans between 2 million triangle meshes. So Russell did mention, but our boolean tools are actually extremely capable. This is a demo of booleaning one 2 million triangle mesh from another. It takes about a minute to do that, but these are, and it's very reliable and robust and scales up really, really well. Anyway, okay, so let's go back to geometry script. So that's there's sort of two main uses, and one is to make kind of your own sort of tools. So the way you can do that in the editor is sort of two ways, with editor utility widgets and actions. So I'm going to do a demo right now of making an editor utility action to flip the normals of something. So it's good that Russell's here, because Russell was always asking us, he wanted to be able to just like select something and flip its normals. And you could do that with our normals tool, but it was like 4 clicks and he wanted it in 1 click. And we are always kind of hesitant to add another button. And I've seen people in the chat saying like, there's so many buttons. And so we didn't want to add just a button just for that. And so in some ways, geometry script exists. So because of that, because we wanted it to be easy for someone to do something like make a 1-click thing where they could flip the normals of something. So I'm going to go editor utilities and create an editor utility blueprint. And it's going to be an asset action utility. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to call it flip normals. And I'm going to edit that. Okay, so there's 2 things we have to do in here. So first we want to expand this. Oh no, I clicked plus. Okay, that's okay. We're going to add a flip normals function. That's the one we're going to implement. But I want to override get supported class. This is important because we only want this to work on static meshes. So I'm going to set the return type to be static mesh. So it's just in the drop down there. Okay, so I'm going to go back to my flip normals function. And basically, so what's going to happen, I can even just save this and do it now, is once we've done that, then when we right click on an asset in the editor here, and we go to this scripted asset actions, you'll see there's a flip normals function. And if we change this to be named flip normals 2, going to update automatically. Now it's flip normals 2. So basically this function in your blueprint becomes an action in the UI. Okay, and then there's a function, get selected assets. So I'm going to right click and type a little bit things to do searches. So that's going to give me the list of assets. And then I'm going to do a for each loop over those assets. And each one I'm going to cast to static mesh. Because, and I'm going to wire up that exec pin. So this is the loop body. So basically each asset that's selected, this will work with multiple selections. I'm actually only going to use one, but it's basically going to give me the static mesh asset in this blueprint. And now I'm going to do something else, which is construct object from class. And I'm going to set this to be a dynamic mesh. I'm going to create this is basically going to be a temporary object that we're going to use. We're going to copy the static mesh to a dynamic mesh, which is the new thing that lets us do all this mesh editing. So then once I've got a dynamic mesh, I'm going to copy mesh from static mesh. I'm going to wire my static mesh asset in there. Okay, so now what this node has done is it's copied that static mesh into the dynamic mesh, assuming it succeeds. And then if it does, I'm going to run a function called flip normals. So that's just one of our many geometry script functions. And if I just right click here and go to geometry script, similar to how the modeling tools have way too many things for us to show in this live stream, there's way too many functions for me to go through. There's over 160 functions, all sorts of things like deformations, like a bend warp or a displace from texture map. I will show that one. It's really cool. Smoothing, all sorts of things. Booleans are in here. There's booleans, like booleans and plane cuts, a lot of the stuff Russell showed is accessible via geometry script. Really, so many things. Okay, so I'm going to copy that mesh from the static mesh. So now I've got it. I'm going to, oh yeah, that's right. I was doing this, flip normals on success. And then so now I've flipped the normals of that mesh. So now I'm done, but I need to put it back into the static mesh asset, right? Because I copied it out into this dynamic mesh that I created. So I'm going to do basically the same thing, copy mesh to static mesh. Just wire that up. The target mesh is the one that we've now flipped. And I need to get that static mesh. So I'm going to zoom way out. You won't be able to read it probably. Just wire that over there. Not great edge layout, but that's it. And so if I compile this, I'm going to save it. So I put an instance of the table in there. I'm going to right click down here, scripted asset actions, flip normals. And there we go. The normals flipped. So it flipped the normals. It has to rebuild the asset. I mean, it looks weird now because the normals are broken. But if you had imported it and the normals were broken, then now it would be fixed. So that's a simple example of this kind of really simple editor operation you can build yourself. You might have noticed if I right clicked here, on the asset, I have this one that's called flip Y up. So one of the videos in that YouTube channel I mentioned does the same kind of thing, and it sets up an action for flipping. Like if you import something that's Y up and you need to flip it to Z up for Unreal, it's just a little action that does that. You can also make actions where you can right click in the level viewport here. It's a little bit more complicated because we want to flip the asset, not the actor. So you have to figure out which asset you have from that actor. But that's called an actor utility action. But basically, same kind of thing. So let's go back to my slide so I remember what I was going to do next. So that's a really simple example of the kind of thing you can do. So like if I wanted to Boolean things, you could do all that kind of stuff via these right-click actions. Another thing you could do is you can set up more complex. So those are just actions where you basically, it's just a command kind of. This one I'm not going to show you building the whole thing because there's too many nodes, but I will just run you briefly through the blueprint. So this is an editor utility widget. So basically when I run it, I'm going to right click on it and run editor utility widget. I didn't do a lot of great UI layout. But essentially what it's going to do is it's going to let me make a blocking volume for whatever's selected. So I'm going to select these three things and click wrap. And you see it made a convex hull blocking volume automatically for those objects. So I can turn up the number of vertices, maybe give it some like buffer, right? And now I think if I pi here, I don't have a character set up here, but oh no, I can fly through it. Sorry, this was the wrong, uh-oh, I'm stuck. Stop, there we go. If I had a character in the scene, the character wouldn't be able to, I guess I could put like a sphere and have it simulate or whatever. But anyway, you get the idea. So that gray outline there, hopefully you can see it on the stream, is a blocking volume that was auto-generated. And I can just delete it and change the settings and make another one. I could make it smaller, I guess. Oh, that was too far. Shrunk too far inside. Okay, so this is editor utility widget. So if you want to make one of those, you just go editor utilities, editor utility widget. And what it gives you is it gives you this more advanced thing where you get a little UI builder and you can, drag in buttons and put labels on them and show settings. I'm not going to go through how you set all this up. It's not that complicated. And I think we've definitely got materials on our website about editor utility widgets and how to use this kind of stuff. It's super useful and powerful to be able to make your own little tools like this. So the graph here is a little complicated. Basically, I use this sequence node, which are super useful, is to do these things, then do these things, then do these things. So the first thing it does is it gets all those selected actors and it loops over them. And for each one of them, it gets its mesh, and copies the mesh out of it. So this is similar to that copy mesh from static mesh, or this is copy mesh from component, and it can take in lots of different types of components and automatically get its mesh and get it in world space, which is how we did this, because we're going to do everything in world space. And this branch here does is it accumulates them all into a combined mesh. So that's this append mesh function. Basically it took all those tables and it made one mesh for them. And then it figured out what the pivot point should be of this output convex hull blocking volume, which is this get pivot for bounds function. And then it computed a mesh convex hull. So what this does is it takes in one mesh and it gives you the convex hull in an output mesh. And then I just transformed it so that the pivot is in the right place. And then there was that offset parameter, and this apply mesh offset is a geometry script function that offset things in and out. So it does that. And then it just uses a function called create new volume from mesh. So this is also a geometry script function. So just you give it this hull mesh that we've computed and offset, and it makes a new volume from that mesh. So this is all, I mean, there's sort of a lot here, but there's actually really not all that much here. And a lot of it's kind of boilerplate to just get the meshes and stuff like that. But from that, we added this functionality that actually the editor doesn't have. There's nothing in the editor where you can just select some objects and make a convex hull. So we basically built a kind of feature ourselves, just using some geometry script and editor utility widgets to provide the UI. And we now are like internal teams are now doing this kind of thing a lot. So building out these kind of UIs, they can become as complex as the sort of editor UI that you see on the screen to build these kind of tools in the editor. Okay, so that's building editor stuff. So sort of like editor tools and operations. So the other thing that is really cool with geometry script is that you can also make kind of procedural mesh objects. So you might even have looked at what I just did there and think like, well, could I make a thing that does that mesh offset operation instead of a tool or operation? And so the short answer is yes. So I'll start with a super simple thing. Let's get rid of these tables and go to this directory here. I'm going to make a blueprint class. I'm going to make a generated dynamic mesh actor. So this is a special type of actor. It's editor only. I'll explain a little bit more about that. There it is. Select. So I'm going to make one of these. I'm going to call it box BP. I'm going to right click and edit. So I'll close these other ones. I'm just going to go right over to the event graph. So I'm not going to use the construction script. I'll explain a bit more about that. But an obvious thing might be to do this in the construction script, and you can, but we actually have, that's why it's a kind of special thing. We have support specifically for making these kind of procedural mesh things. So I'm going to type on rebuild. So basically what I did here, and this is the first thing you have to do every time, is right click and go on rebuild. And then you'll get this event on rebuild generated mesh. So basically, this is where you generate the mesh for this box actor. So I've got this target mesh. I'm going to right click here and say append box. I'm just going to leave all the settings. I'm going to compile that. And now when I drag one of those into the level, it's a box. And I mean, that's not that exciting. It's just a box. I could switch this to be an sphere box, what we call one of our two types of spheres. If I compile that, now it became a sphere, right? So essentially the mesh is being generated on the fly by this blueprint. So this target mesh, if you remember in the flip normals one, I did this construct object from class and I made a dynamic mesh object. So that's what this target mesh is. This is the target mesh for this actor, this generated dynamic mesh actor. So anything I do to it is going to appear over here. So I switch that back to the box. I'm going to change this dimensions to 200 file. Okay, so now I've got a wider box, right? So you can see I can set those settings. So I could go over here and add a variable. We'll call that width and make that a float. make it public. We have to compile once, then we can go set the width over here, and we'll start it at, sorry, I'm misclicking. Compile that. Oh, I didn't wire it in. So I got to get the width, hook it up here to this dimension X. And now we've got a width setting. So now I can change that setting. And so now I have a parametric box, right? It's not scaling it. If you see the scale here, it doesn't change. It's all 1, 1, 1. I'm just changing the box generator, and you can see the mesh here. And you can, do other stuff in here. Like I could add some subdivisions, 2, 3, 4. Right, and now the mesh has some subdivisions. So basically, by using the sort of blueprint variables and wiring them, building out these graphs and wiring stuff into them, you can build a kind of parametric generator. So I'll just take this target mesh and I'll do, oh no, I don't want to append, I just want to type bevel. I'll do Russell's favorite operation. You have Russell to thank for bevel in UE 5.0 because we weren't going to do it, and he badgered us literally for a year. I mean, we were going to do it eventually, but we didn't really have time. But Russell really made it happen.
Daily
really
badgering.
And so I'm going to right click on this options pin and split struct pin, and I'm going to make I'll just duplicate this is the fastest way. Bevel size, that, and set this to, I don't know, 2. That in there. Oh, this drag and drop of parameters doesn't work on the split struct pins. So now I can go over here and change the bevel right on the fly. So now we basically made this sort of parametric box object. And you could do this with any kind of shape generator. So we have a whole bunch of them. So I did that append box. I didn't show these before, but I'll go back to geometry script if I can find it. Right, it's alphabetic, G. So there's geometry script. We've got, should we call it primitives? We called it primitives. So you can see boxes, capsule, cone, curved stairs. We have linear stairs. So the stairs generator in the Lyra demo that was done in the launch event is just this linear stairs primitive, right? And they did a bevel afterwards, and that's how they changed the bevel in the video. So there's all sorts of, there's revolves and extrudes and all sorts of things in there. Okay, so that's the box. That's a sort of simple box shape generator. So I did this procedural box demo. So I'm just going to show you a few pictures now in these slides to just explain some stuff from the nodes. I guess I can do it on, I could do it on the nodes, but so one thing is you'll notice that these functions, when we make them and they're empty, they have this target mesh and they have this asset picker. I just want to mention, ignore that asset picker. You have to wire something in. There aren't assets you can put there. This is just a thing we, because like I said, it's experimental, so there's still a few rough edges. So we need to hide that, but it's not hidden, and it has tripped some people up. The target mesh is on the input and output sides. So that doesn't mean it's outputting a new mesh. It's outputting the same mesh. We did this. I showed a picture on the next slides, and I guess you even saw me doing it. It lets you chain together these operations really nicely, but it's the same thing going in and out of each of these nodes, unless it's got a different name. So instead of having to wire like one thing into a bunch of nodes, you can wire from one node to the next. But it's not a different mesh. If it's got the same name on either side, it's the same mesh. The options, so there tends to, in most of our nodes, there tends to be, almost always an options input, and that options is like a custom input for that node. So in this case, this is a mesh plane cut, and it's got a long name, geometry script mesh plane cut options, and that has settings for the node. And sometimes we put, if there's something that you're basically always going to have to use, we'll put it as a separate input. But generally there's an options, and you can right click on it like I did and do split struct pin. You can right click on the options or on the input transforms and stuff like that to expand them out if you want to do more specific stuff in line in the node. But this helps us, having these separate option structs helps us kind of keep things tidy when you don't need to change these settings, and helps us going forward as we add more capability to these nodes and things like that, to make sure that we can keep things sort of backwards compatible while still being able to update them as we go forward. And then just one last thing about the nodes, that they almost all have this debug pin. This is a thing that we didn't, I mean, to be honest, we didn't get it done in time for 5.0. So what we intend to do with this is to make it possible to wire in a debug object that you'll be able to use for a sort of geometric debugging, like to help you figure out what's going on, you know, what's the mesh at a current state in the graph, without having to go and, you know, break up all the wiring. But that's not actually available yet. So this should be hidden, but we didn't get it hidden in time. Okay, so I'll show you another example of a displace from texture operation. So this is going to combine a few different things. I'm going to get rid of that. I'm going to make a new generated mesh, generated dynamic mesh actor, and we'll call it displace BP. Go to edit, and we'll jump over the event graph, and we'll right click, and we'll go to rebuild, event on rebuild generated mesh. Okay, so I'm going to add a variable. I'm going to call it source mesh, and I'm going to make it a static mesh type. Find that. So basically, what I showed you before was like a parametric shape generator, where I started from scratch. But here, what I want to do is I want to start with a thing. So I'm going to get that source mesh, and I'm going to do a copy mesh from static mesh. But now what it's going to do is it's going to read this source mesh. And actually, before I do that, I want to right click on this and change it to a validated get. So a validated get means it'll error check and have an input bin. And it's good to do that to avoid bad things from happening. Okay, so I'm going to copy out that static mesh. And so actually that's by itself is a valid thing. So if I drag one of these into the level, there's nothing in it. But I'm going to go to modeling mode quickly, and I'm just going to make an empty torus. That oops, I need two. Oh well. That I'm going to use for this example. So I've got that this displace BP, and I've got my source mesh. That's the parameter I made, and I'm just going to stick this torus in there, right? And so now every time I move this, it's actually recomputing. It's rereading that static mesh, and generating this, basically updating the generator, and that update is reading the static mesh. And so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a PN tessellation. Let's say do 2 levels. Let's make levels a parameter. We're going to be an integer. It's going to be public. We'll compile. We'll say that level's, I can start out at 0. We'll wire that in there. So now what we have is, so we've got our sort of default torus, but we can subdivide it. Uh-oh. Set a limit on there, because if I drag that up to 100, it's going to be bad. Let's set it to 4.
You can't go above 10.
Mistakes could be made. So now you can see, now I have like a subdivided torus, option for subdividing. And then I'm going to apply displace from texture map. So I'm also going to add a texture input. Make this a texture 2D. There's some of these things have so many. Texture 2D. There we go. Public. Again, get texture, convert to validated get, just to make sure I have one. If it's valid, we'll wire it in here. And let's split the options, and you see there's a magnitude, and we'll just add a mirror that. We'll make that a float. We'll set the default to 1 there too. And wire that in. Okay, so now nothing's going to change because I don't have a texture set. But if I find one, where's my display? So I've built this blueprint before, so I have some textures here. It's not doing anything yet. But you see now it's displacing it. But it starts to get more expensive, of course, right? This is always the thing with procedural generators. So it's displacing it, but you see the normals are wrong. That's because the displace node, the displace tool, so in modeling mode here we have a tool, Russell didn't show this one, but we have a displace tool that does basically exactly this, but it does a lot of stuff automatically. But in geometry script, because we want it to be as efficient as possible, we're not going to automatically compute the normals because maybe you're going to do 2 displacements. So we have a function recompute normals. Now the normals are getting recomputed as we change those settings. So I could go a lot higher here, but you see now it's gotten kind of chunky. So I have also for this example, I have a video on the YouTube channel that shows how to add basically a checkbox over here where you can, if you're happy, turn off the recomputing every time you move it, and it'll stay in that current state, but it won't change. But when you change the settings, it won't do anything if that checkbox is disabled. But essentially, lets you kind of freeze it in a current state, and then it's then there's no overhead when you're sort of moving it around or doing things with it. And that's the kind of thing we're probably going to build in the future, that by default, but you can build it right now in the blueprint. Okay, so that's a simple displacement blueprint. Now, this is a different kind of, I mentioned just then that like this object, because it's being updated as you move it around, that's not great. And also, it's not a static mesh. And so why do you care that it's not a static mesh? Well, a lot of UE rendering features only work on static meshes, like for instance, Nanite and Lumen. Now, this displacement capability is a really great way to make Nanite stuff, right? If you have high-res displacement maps, then you can just basically, drop them on objects and to make really high poly shapes that you maybe want to use Nanite on. Like I could just put this bunny in here instead of the torus. Now, oh, it doesn't have UVs, so it didn't work. How about the table? Let's see what happens. Oh yeah, there we go. I mean, that looks terrible, but it did work. It displaced the table. Let's put the torus back. So
modern art.
Sorry. Should have planned ahead. I could put this cliff in there, but it's half of 500,000 triangles, and so I'm not going to do that right now. Okay, so something you might want to be able to do is convert this dynamic mesh actor, because that's what this is, to a static mesh. So there's a couple options there. One is we have tools in modeling mode. So there's a few tools in here. There's this convert tool that, for instance, will let me create a static, basically convert this in place to a static mesh. And there's also, Russell showed the mesh merge tool. Where is that one?
Duplicate.
Yeah, that's what I'm looking for. Oh yeah, mesh dupe. Okay, so I'm going to duplicate because I want to keep the inputs. So let's duplicate that. So now this is a static mesh version of it, right? And now, now they're not linked or anything like that. So if I go back here and I change this to 10, right? What I could do is I could also use the transfer tool. So if I select this one and then the static mesh and do transfer and accept it, now it's going to basically update the static mesh with this source mesh. And this is actually what I just did there is kind of the central part of the whole Lyra system. So that's one option. The other option is we can actually build it into this blueprint, the ability to kind of bake out to a static mesh. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to duplicate this source mesh. I'm going to call it target mesh. I'm going to add a function called bake to static mesh. And essentially, if something is set here, let's do convert to validated get. And then I'm going to right click and go get dynamic mesh. This is the other way. So in this event graph, it gave me this target mesh, but there's also a function on the dynamic mesh component, which is called get dynamic mesh. And that gets you the same mesh. So this function, basically when we call it, it's going to get the current mesh and it's going to go copy mesh to static mesh. and I'm going to put the validated toStatic mesh in there. And I'm going to, this function, I'm going to set it to be call in editor. And that's going to do a magic thing where now, if I find it in here, now we've got a button called bake to static mesh. So it took the name of the function of the button from this, what I named this function. So now I don't have a target mesh set, so it's not going to do anything. But I remember before I accidentally made 2 toruses, so I'll just use that torus. I'm going to set that as the target mesh. I'm going to put one in the scene just so you could see that it exists. I'm going to go back down there. I'm going to click bake to static mesh, and now it baked it to that torus. So basically, I've kind of built a little utility here now where I can use this to update an existing static mesh asset. There's also a capability to make a new static mesh asset from a geometry script, which I will actually show in the Lyra demo of this, because this is, again, part of essentially what we used in Lyra. Okay, so that's essentially now what I've made is kind of like a little tool where I can make high poly displaced things, right? It's not doesn't have to be a torus. We can put any mesh in there, any displacement map, set our levels and magnitude, and then bake it out to a static mesh. So it's a sort of like a procedural generator. You could think of it as just a variant of our displace tool, but it's also kind of a procedural generator for shapes, and a kind of general purpose tool, but it is also an actor. So you could give it other functionality and sort of all sorts of cool stuff. Okay, so displace from texture. Oh, I've got a cool video. So this is from someone at Epic that we found on, actually I saw it on Twitter. Someone, when I started putting out JavaScript videos, this appeared on Twitter, and I posted it on our internal channels, and it turned out it was another Epic person who'd made it. So here, in this video, what's happening is it's using what I just showed you. There's a plane, the plane gets tessellated highly and displaced, and then one more thing happens, which is that they do a plane cut a little bit above where the plane initially was. So anything that didn't get displaced gets cut off, right? And then these are just some high-res textures. And now essentially this is a tool for, turning those high-res textures into kind of height field meshes, high-res sort of mesh pieces, which is pretty awesome. That's, again, a thing that will take multiple steps in the editor. And actually, they're even mirrored. Yeah, maybe you can see in this. I don't know if you'll be able to see it on the stream resolution, but there's a line here. It looks like they've mirrored the parts, which I only just noticed. So again, a kind of like more advanced version of sort of procedural shape generator built with geometry script. This is the bake to static mesh demo I just showed. I have a video for that if you want to go watch that one. I'll just show you a few other things that people have done in the last couple of weeks with geometry script since it came out in the first preview of UE5. So this are some examples from Christoph Lovis, who's a UE sort of third-party developer. So he made a sort of like jewel or stones or crystals generator by just doing kind of random plane cuts and smoothing it out a bit. You can also use, if you add a spline mesh component, you can sample from the spline mesh. And so he used that to make essentially like a revolve generator that is based off a curve, which again is the thing we kind of have in modeling mode as a tool. We have a revolve tool, but we don't have spline curves. So this is kind of assembling something to extend the editor, which I think is super awesome. And then like a couple days later, someone else figured out how to do that to make sort of even more advanced stuff. So here's a sort of procedural wall generator where the base is a spline mesh component, and then in the generator, the spline mesh is being sampled, and then the points from the spline mesh are being used then to do the generation of this castle wall sort of shape generator. So super cool stuff that I'll be totally honest with you, I didn't know this would be possible when we made this. I didn't know you'd be able to stick a spline component on there and do this. I probably should have known that as a geometry fellow, but I had never had to assemble things that way. So very, very exciting to see all the stuff people are doing. How are you doing for time? Half hour. I'll quickly show booleans because I mean, obviously, you want to do booleans in a procedural generator. That's just like super critical thing to be able to do. So let's do generated dynamic mesh actor. Init boolean VP. I'll just do a quick one. Won't do it with the full thing from that video. Build generated mesh. Do append box. And now, okay, we made a box, right? Now we want to subtract a sphere from it. So we have a node for that. Mesh boolean, apply mesh boolean. Okay, the tricky part though here is we need a second mesh. So before I showed you that thing that was like construct object from class, right? And we could use that. So basically what we want to do is we also want to append a sphere to something, to a separate mesh, and then we want to subtract it. So I could do construct object from class. That causes a lot of problems because this will be a temporary object that at the end of the blueprint gets thrown away and needs to be garbage collected. That's like a sort of technical thing in UE where it manages stuff that gets created and destroyed. And that is going to make your editor slow down over time and use a lot of memory if we do it this way. So to work around that, we have something called a compute mesh you can allocate. So allocate is like a programmer word, means we're like allocating memory. But essentially what this does, it means that we can make a temporary mesh that we can use to do other stuff. And then at the end of the blueprint, we're going to do something else. And actually, let's do a sequence, because this is actually the cleanest way to do it. In a lot of my videos, I've actually wired it in at the end of the graph, but this is simpler. If you just do your whole blueprint is one thing, and then the second, we're going to go release all compute meshes. And this will essentially clean up these temporary meshes. So it's important to do this. If you don't do it after 1,000 of these get created by running the blueprint over and over, you'll get a warning message reminding you that you need to do this release. At the end, you can also do it one by one, but essentially let's just do it this way. So I made a compute mesh. I'm going to append a sphere to it. I'm going to translate, let's see, I'm going to split the transform. And this was dimensions 100, so the top corner is 50, 50. Okay, so now I've got a mesh I can subtract. I'm going to set that as the tool. I'm going to subtract that. And that's the whole thing. Let's compile that. So now, oh, that's right, because the wide needs to be 100. Is it Y? I think it's Z. Yep. Now I put a sphere at the corner and then I subtracted it. I could go over here and change it to a union. You want to see what the actual shapes were, right? And so those were two separate meshes, and then I subtracted them, and I subtracted the temporary one from the main one. And so this is how you use a Boolean. You need two meshes, and these temporary meshes, this is a really critical thing. These temporary compute meshes you use to make sort of in progress states of your script. Again, this one I have a video for where I combine that with doing some patterns. So I took that sphere in the corner and I tiled it, which we have a function for that called append mesh transformed that will let you basically append a bunch of copies, and then I use that to subtract it. I'll just mention something. This came up for us with internal artists who started using this. You don't have to do a union to combine two things. You can just append, and then they'll be overlapping, but that's often actually better, and it's almost always faster to compute at least. So if you're just adding stuff, you can use append. You don't have to use a Boolean union. It's much more efficient to just use this append mesh or this append mesh repeated I just mentioned. Like I said, we have this these sort of temporary meshes that you need to use sometimes, and we have that function to allocate compute mesh and release all compute meshes. So we call this dynamic mesh pooling. Essentially, it's reusing the U objects, if that makes sense to you, and it's reusing the memory for those U objects instead of always deleting them and allocating new ones. So that's built into dynamic mesh actor. if you in those editor utility widgets that I showed, you can use a function called create dynamic mesh pool to make your own pool, because they don't have this built in. It's less critical there, because basically if you're running it once, you'll make one temporary thing, it's okay. But the geometry script where every frame, as you move it around, it's recomputing, this becomes a problem. Okay, I'll just talk a little bit about these pieces for more technical. This is like the C++ level, but it's good to know about, even if you aren't in the C++ level, what these things are. So we basically added a few new things in UE5 to support what I just showed you. So we added this thing called the U dynamic mesh, and then a component and actor for that. And then we had this generated dynamic mesh actor. U dynamic mesh, basically what it is, it's a U object container for something called F dynamic mesh 3, which is the like C++ level class that is the mesh. So this is a new, I mean, it's not as new because it's been in UE for a few years now. This is the basis for all the modeling tools. It's a high performance editable mesh type, so it uses more memory than other meshes, but it allows all these edits, like that things like a mesh description or a static mesh don't really support out of the box. And we've got this huge library of geometry operations for F dynamic mesh 3, all in C++. Just to be clear, the U dynamic mesh, it's not an asset. So, you know, if you're familiar with a U static mesh, that's an asset that gets serialized and you know, cooks in your game, but as a separate file, as an asset file. So U dynamic mesh isn't an asset. It is just a purely a C++ thing that you can interact with in blueprints. U dynamic mesh component is a component for a U dynamic mesh. This used to be a thing that we used purely for kind of like live previews in modeling tools. So this is how we can support like sort of real-time sculpting on something that's 5 million triangles, is via this component. It's very optimized for fast updates, but it's not as good for, I mean, you pay a cost for that ability, and that is that it doesn't render as efficiently as a static mesh. So in UE5, we made this a real component. So you can create and save them in the level. You can edit them with modeling tools. You can set collision and simulate physics on them. You can procedurally generate them using geometry script, both in editor and at runtime. And then we made an actor for that component, dynamic mesh actor. So this is a standard actor type for a dynamic mesh component, similar to a static mesh actor and component. In modeling mode, you can create them, but it's not enabled by default in UE5. You have to go into the editor settings and turn on enable dynamic mesh actor. So I'll just show you. You go in here, you go edit, editor preferences, enable dynamic mesh actor. Oh. No, it's in the project settings. Dynamic mesh actors. You enable dynamic mesh actors, and then when you go in modeling mode, you can make a box that's a static mesh, Russell showed you, and a volume. You can also make a dynamic mesh. And so the critical thing here is to understand that there's not an asset. So if I make a box, right, it's going to make a new asset. There's the box it just made. But if I make a dynamic mesh, it's not going to make an asset. So you might, so that's good and bad, because one of the things that does come up in modeling tools is that you end up making lots of temporary assets. So if you watched what Russell was doing, you know, he made some things and he combined them. When he combined them, the old assets didn't get deleted. They were still in his content browser somewhere. And also everything was instances. So he had to sort of like merge things to make unique copies of them. So if I poly edit this one, it's going to update both of them, because this is actually editing the asset underneath. But if I take the dynamic mesh and I duplicate it, and then I poly edit the new one, it doesn't affect the original because they're completely separate meshes. There's no instancing or anything like that. So these geometry script objects are also dynamic mesh actors. They just have a blueprint that generates the mesh. But when you make one with like a modeling tool, it's just a standalone one that doesn't have a procedural generation involved. Okay, so I just did the demo of that. this is, I'm going to skip some of these because I've gone over time. I just wanted to mention versus procedural mesh components. So because a lot of people who've done this kind of like tried to do this kind of procedural stuff in the editor, you often end up using procedural mesh component. So I wouldn't say dynamic mesh components exactly are a replacement for procedural mesh component at this time, but you can, there's a lot of times where you would preferentially use dynamic mesh component. And we are hoping to reach a point where there's really no reason to use procedural mesh component. The main difference in UE 5.0 has to do with physics support. Procedural mesh component supports async physics building, and dynamic mesh component doesn't, but it does now in 5.1, or it will in 5.1. It's already been implemented in UE5 main, if you're familiar with that kind of terminology in our GitHub. And so it's basically overall more efficient for storage. You can handle millions of triangles, whereas procedural mesh component really will slow down and that kind of stuff. They're both serialized in the level. Neither of them supports Nanite or Lumen. So those are some of the current limitations. I think I have a slide here on, yeah, they don't support Nanite, Lumen, or distance fields. They do both support ray tracing. Neither of them has LODs, levels of detail, and they're both serialized in the level. Okay, and so let's just mention Python, which I didn't have time to talk about, which I knew I wouldn't, so I didn't try. I've got one video about doing Python stuff I mentioned. This is really great for that kind of editor utility stuff, editor tools, QA tools, if you're in a big studio and you want to like check all your assets to make sure that they have some geometric properties, like maybe all the UVs are you know, in a valid UV space and stuff like that. You can script those things with Python using all the same geometry script stuff. Okay, and then I mentioned Lyra, so I'll just quickly show in Lyra, we basically built these procedural shape generators. So this is a Lyra starter game, and there's this tools directory, and in there you'll find some blueprint classes, like for advanced window, corner extrude, a ramp, the stairs. There's the stairs. So these are the stairs, for instance, that were demoed in the sort of UE5 launch, right? So this is a stairs object. If we go into here and we look, these are quite a bit more complicated than the ones that I was showing. You see there's, if I zoom out, there's actually quite a lot going on here. That's because they do a lot more stuff. So they have a lot more settings, but ultimately so what happened here, there's a tech artist who built these. I think he's actually in the chat on YouTube, Simone Lombardo here at Epic, who basically took what we had done with Geometry Script and just like turned it up to 11 and did all sorts of awesome stuff, building these kind of level design parts. So what did I want to show you? So the stairs settings over here, like I showed things that had 1 or 2 settings. These have all sorts of settings, so I can go in, but they're all sort of accumulating things. So I can turn on the bevel, right? And now the stairs have a bevel, the same way that we put a bevel on that cube. There's some stuff in here to generate simple collision. There's nodes for that. I didn't have time to show them. Things like changing the step height, which will automatically, so this blueprint automatically computes, like given a step height setting, how many steps do you want, and that kind of stuff. All sorts of super cool options. Yeah, like I think in the video they turn on floating. So in here, there's these linear stairs appends. That's the sort of core that makes the stair geometry, but a lot of the settings are computed by other blueprint stuff. This is what tech artists are like the geniuses at figuring out, like, how do you compute all these settings from other settings and stuff like that. There's the part that does the bevel. And then there's a simplified collision generation. So there's a bunch of nodes for that. So you can go in here and play around and experiment with these really sophisticated blueprints. And like I showed, right? So these are all these dynamic mesh components, but the same, sorry, I just have to drink a bit of water. I've been talking for too long, clearly. So remember I showed you that bake to static mesh button. That's exactly this button. And we also have this one, generate new static mesh. So basically, if you wanted to use this to build your level, you know, you could take this part here, generate a new static mesh. I'm going to click that. And that's going to make a mesh automatically. And you see it populated this target static mesh. I can even browse to it. And here it is. It's in this directory, which is where they go by default. So now I can place, why can't I place that? I wish Simone was on the stream so he could tell me. And so anyway, only reference assets. Oh, it's because of plugins and levels, right? It's to keep you from shooting yourself in the foot by referencing content from one plugin in another. Okay, so let's go to a real level, and I'll do it in there. Recent levels, expanse blockout. So it's got to load the map. So basically, the Lyra levels were built. Lyra, sorry, I called it Lyra for a long time before anyone corrected me, and I still haven't adjusted. So this is a simplified version. The actual expanse level is even more complicated. But these whole levels were built using these geometry script tools. So, and that's actually what's under the level. So if you open this, you'll see it looks maybe a little weird. You find all these like parts floating down here, and that's because these parts, like I kind of showed before, where I had the like this displaced torus, and then I was baking it to a static mesh. These parts are the things that are used to generate the actual level geometry, which is static meshes, which it has to be because it supports Lumen in this project. And actually Nanite is turned on for most of these assets too. But we didn't want to lose the ability to like edit them still, because that baking that I showed before was kind of destructive, right? A little bit. You had to, we could go down here and try and find which, these arches were generated by something down here. But what we did is we built the system into Lyra where you can swap. So basically I'm going to right click on this thing and go scripted actor actions, swap to generated mesh. So this is one of those editor utility actions like I showed before. It's an actor action. When I do that, I mean, nothing really changed. It looks the same, but actually this you see that only this one has this little diamond. And this is a thing I didn't show, but you can basically make these little 3D handles in a blueprint in your geometry script blueprints, or any blueprint actually. It's just that you make an F vector parameter and you make it, there's a little box to check to say give it a 3D widget. So now I can edit this thing, and now I can right click on it. I got to go to the right thing over here, right? So I'm editing it, so I can now go down here and click the bake to static mesh button, because this right, it has a generated mesh associated with it like I showed before, and it's going to update all of them, right? So I can do these kind of edits in place and update all of the, because what it's really doing is just updating the static mesh, and all of these other ones are still that static mesh. And then I can right click on it and go swap to static mesh and go back. So now it's the static mesh again. You see the handle disappeared. And so now I can go just basically do that on any other one. Because they're all the same. We'll put it back. Bake to static mesh and then go back. And then I can swap it back to the static mesh. So almost all the stuff in this level, nearly every level design piece was created this way. So what the level designer did is they took these objects, they dragged them into the level, and they configured it in place, until they were happy with what it looked like. And then they generated a static mesh for it, and then they swapped it to that generated static mesh. And then when they want to edit it later, they just swap back and do the edit. And so this is, a pretty exciting thing that we think. We built that whole system essentially in Blueprint. So all of those swapping actions are here in this baked generated mesh system. So there's there's some special base classes that keep track of that relationship, and the editor actions that do the swapping. But it's all done here in Blueprints. So you can migrate this to other projects and sort of do your own kind of modeling like this. And you can make your own. So these tools, you can just right click here and make a new blueprint that becomes one of these tools. They're not a special thing that isn't easily portable to any other project. So I think that's my last thing. That's the last thing I was going to show. Okay, so I guess I went over time. I think. I'm sorry, Russell. We only got 9 minutes left. It says.
Well, you were. It was clear as you were talking how many things I missed. So you know, it's
I think you both did great. No worries. But if you're up to it, there's a couple of questions that were popping up a few times in chat that I'd like to address, especially the ones that were asked by several people. I think we can sneak a couple of those in there. One of the main ones is for the modeling tools. Are there hotkeys available for that? Can they assign anything to hotkeys?
Yes, there are. There's let's see. It's under editor preferences. If you want to switch over, hotkeys is always one of those ones that's always tricky. You can actually bind a lot of things to custom hotkeys, but you know, inside Unreal, a lot of the hotkeys are already used. But if you want to customize them in the editor preferences, you can adjust them. In terms of, there's actually quite a few hotkeys that are already associated with some of the modeling tools, and they tend to get displayed in the menu when you're doing things. So if there's stuff you wanted to do, for instance, I think like Ryan mentioned, transform the control key in the sculpt tools. There's options as well. In CubeGrid, there's actually a little shortcut info right here, so you can actually see if you were, laying out CubeGrid stuff, you can see quickly, how to do stuff and that's in there for you as well. So there are definitely abilities to edit hotkeys as well as trying to remember. And there definitely is some tooltips in here for them as well, for ones that exist.
Awesome. I know that for me, hotkeys are integral to making sure it speeds up my workflow. So I'm sure a lot of people are going to be relieved to know that they can still use hotkeys with some of these favorite tools.
Yes.
Yeah. Can Nanite geometry be deformed with these modeling tools?
Yes. I actually, it's funny, I did a previous demo where I actually had some of the meshes actually had Nanite enabled on them, and I actually had just done the demo with Nanite enabled. So yes, you can. In this particular case, I had not loaded the Quixel Nanite meshes, but yeah, you can do it. It does have an impact because, Ryan, correct me if I'm wrong, because it is having to recalculate some of the Nanite information when you complete the operation.
Yeah, so when you're editing a thing live, it is not using Nanite. So basically, Nanite is like a rendering level thing on a static mesh asset. And so when you go to edit a static mesh asset with the modeling tools, we are actually basically hiding your instance in the level, and we're making a preview mesh. That's this dynamic mesh component that I mentioned, and that lets you efficiently do stuff to it. And when you're done, you click accept. It updates the static mesh asset, which then updates the Nanite rendering geometry and stuff like that. And so it doesn't affect it while you're modeling, but when you click accept, if you're on a 2 million triangle mesh, it takes longer to do the updating because of Nanite.
Understandably so.
Yeah, that's right. It's 2 million triangles.
Yeah, it adds up a little bit eventually, so.
Yeah. But one of the things I saw some people asking in the chat earlier, like, why would we do our modeling in UE? And that one of our big things we've been focused on is making a lot of our stuff scale up to Nanite scale resolution. So, we can sculpt. We can sculpt on a raw 5 million triangle sort of mesh, and our deform tools and stuff like that are very performant at those resolutions, because our internal teams who've been building Nanite content have been using these tools to do a lot of that stuff. And so that's one of our kind of focuses, has been making things work at Nanite scale on a lot where it's possible. Some things still, I have to say, are not that performant yet at that scale, but a lot of things, we have an auto UV generator that works on millions of triangles in it doesn't take hours, it takes minutes, that kind of thing.
I mean, even those wood beams that I was dragging in, I think they're a little bit older Quixel assets, but they were at the highest quality Quixel assets that they had. I mean, they were far more dense than I think you would, for a beam that you might expect. And it's fine. I haven't had any issues, working with the high res geometry.
That's awesome. And I know, again, that's going to be very helpful for especially people that are trying to make stuff with exclusively Quixel content. I think that'll be really helpful in the long run for those. There was a question about the plane cut that was blowing everybody's minds earlier. How does the plane cut handle complex geometry? Does it retopo or preserve quads?
It does not retopo, and we don't have quads. Everything is a triangulated mesh, so it's cutting through the triangles, and then you have the option to fill or not.
Awesome. Is there a way to set up color IDs using Unreal 5?
So, vertex color or...
Yeah, I'm not sure what color ID means in that context.
It'd probably be vertex color, I would assume.
Yes, so there actually is... Let's see if...
We have basically tools where you can bake to vertex colors, and then we have it's not really part of modeling mode. There's a separate paint mode that allows you to paint vertex colors.
Yeah, sorry, I was trying something. I wasn't bake to vertex is not something I've tried too much. Tried before.
I'm coming in with the hard questions. You better
it's
have
a
read
live
up.
demo. I'll experiment too. I'd have to see if I think Lonnie and the guys are online. They can ping me and tell me what I'm doing wrong.
Yeah, they can handle it, chat.
But I think Ryan said there's another mode for painting, and then you can paint weight maps and stuff directly in in here. So
awesome. For some of the questions directed more at the scripting side now, so it's your turn, Ryan.
Sure.
Switching it up. How heavy is Boolean for the engine? Because obviously the logic for Boolean sometimes can be calculated as a very heavy step.
Right. So it's a hard question to answer because it really varies based on how often you're doing the Boolean and how many triangles are involved. And then it can also depend on the configuration, like things that are, if you have lots of stuff that's coplanar, like two cubes that are the same height that are overlapping is more complicated than if the two cubes are offset so that no triangles are like directly on top of each other. Generally, it's not an operation that you would want to be doing every frame. So in these demos that I've been doing, it's being computed as I move something, but then when I'm rotating the camera, it's not recomputing that Boolean. If it was, you would see it. You would feel the frame rate. I've done some demos and experiments before with things like a wall and a gun that makes holes in the wall with a sphere or something. Like you shoot sphere. We did one that was the bunny gun, where it basically shoots a bunny rabbit at the wall and subtracts the bunny rabbit. And like in that kind of thing where it's a one-shot operation, you would probably be able to see some hitch on that frame, and then you have to kind of tune the resolutions to a point where you feel like that hitch is acceptable. Because it is, anything with the scripting right now is being computed on the game thread. We've been looking at like, can we make these things async? But in general, blueprints run on the game thread, and it's a bit complicated it makes it harder for the user to use the stuff if everything has to be running async and sending messages around. So yeah, that's why we've been mostly focused, although I said it's available at runtime, we've been mostly focused on geometry scripting in the editor as like procedural generators. But once it's generated, it's not doing the Boolean anymore. And so you don't pay those costs sort of every frame.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Awesome. For the scripting, how expensive overall would you consider it to be? To narrow it down maybe a little bit further, when would you not want to use scripting, especially considering Nanite and some of the other features? When would you encourage using something besides the scripting?
I guess it sort of depends on for what purpose. Like I would say using the geometry scripting at runtime is more kind of experimental as a concept than using it in the editor. In the editor, if something is expensive, it'll sort of lag while you're doing the operation, and then it won't be slow anymore. If you're trying to do it at runtime, like people have asked for things like, well, could I procedurally generate a whole level on startup? And you could, but it would probably be too slow unless the level was very simple. If you're generating something that's a million triangles, that's going to take a couple seconds at least. Nanite isn't so like I said, Nanite's not really supported on these procedural objects. You could, and it's not supported at runtime to automatically or to make a new Nanite mesh at runtime. So there's a lot of things like that would just be too slow. Like if you had a million triangles, the Nanite pre-computation that has to happen takes a couple seconds. So it would be too slow to do that at runtime. So using any of this kind of scripting stuff at runtime is something that is really situation dependent. Like you really have to do performance profiling and figure out like, is it fast enough to do this in this context? And definitely like the sort of dream is like, oh, everything could be procedurally generated on the fly, but the performance wise that we're sort of not there to do, especially if you want to do like really high resolution models and things like that.
Yeah, absolutely. So this next question I'm going to pose to both of you. I'm curious about
Sure.
both of your answers for this one. But with these modeling tools, obviously some of these are fairly new, fairly experimental, and they'll continue to be built upon and reiterated over time as well. But ultimately, end goal, I want to look into the future a little bit with the both of you. With this tool set, what is the goal here? Are you trying to eliminate the need for external tools and be able to just make everything directly in engine?
I think I'll answer that one, Russell, unless you want to.
You can get.
Okay, so we aren't trying to eliminate anything, definitely. I mean, people make amazing stuff with all the other DCCs out there, and Unreal integrates with a lot of them. We are trying to make it possible for people like, getting into the game industry to make their stuff directly in the editor. And there's a lot of good reasons for that, because particularly around iteration time. So if you want to make an amazing fire hydrant, you can do that in anything, right? And you can import it. And the same way that we import stuff from Quixel Mixer, right? It's like an asset now and you place it in your level. But especially for this level design kind of stuff, like I sort of briefly demoed with Lyra, and Russell demoed with like making the ramps and things like that. The going back and forth between a DCC starts to be, you reach a point where like, as you're fine tuning a model, you're spending most of your time just re-importing, like waiting for stuff to go back and forth and not actually doing your creative things. And so we're really focusing on trying to make those iteration things less painful. And there's a huge world out there of modeling stuff, like particularly Blender. If you look at it, like there's hundreds of third-party add-ons and stuff like that to do all sorts of amazing modeling stuff in Blender. And we're not trying to eliminate any of that. We're just trying to make it more efficient for people to work in Unreal. And so that's sort of our view on that right now, is like, use whatever tools you're the most comfortable with and let you work the most efficiently. And we're going to try and give people things that help them build Unreal content. But we still, we're working on an entirely new, you can see it in the UE5 main development of a whole new importing system that makes importing more efficient and stuff like that. So we're investing in both of those directions sort of simultaneously.
Yeah, I mean, and I think I didn't really touch on it too much. Is working with imported data and making sure that you have tools. There's tools for when I hit like baking scale or fixing normals or correcting meshes. These are all little things that our advanced users are probably dealing with, and a lot of times it's like, oh, I brought my stuff into Unreal and I forgot to do this, or I need to do this, or I need to adjust this map just a little bit, or this UV a little bit, and having to continuously bring it in, go back out, go to another package, redo these things, is a big, takes a lot of time, and it becomes more inefficient. Whereas if you can just make those corrections directly in the editor, it can really, really make the whole process more efficient. We've had obviously conversations with like the Fortnite artists and some of the special projects artists who've, really taken things to the extreme. But I think, like Ryan said, it's, for me, what I'm getting into it is as people learn, they're going to experience and they're going to try out different tools and they're going to try, experiment with Maya or Blender or whatever it is. But what I, find the most fun about this process is not only the ability to help, make sure that models that I've brought in are efficient or they're working, or, do cleanup or data prep operations. But it's also just like what I was doing today is it's actually quite a bit of creatively is fun to basically be in here and iterate through things quickly, directly. And yeah, I mean, in production, might be like, okay, some of this stuff need to, jump over to a DCC with texture artists and the whole blown thing. But creatively, it's great to have all the stuff directly in the, directly in the editor. It's a lot of fun. And just in case somebody was asking, the vertex color, I forgot to add the texture map to the baking, but there is a bake vertex to bake from like a texture map to vertex colors. It's in there. It's actually called bake VTX, which seems rather obvious, but I just forgot to add the texture map in there. So
thank you for the extra tidbit in there. Both of you had such nice answers to that question. Here I was hoping for someone to be like, yeah, eliminate all the competition. It's only Unreal.
I mean, that's a very, very tough high bar. I mean, Maya's 26 years old now, 20. I mean,
yeah,
or maybe not that old, but I mean, I know like and 3ds Max, they've had a long time to really develop that tool set and iterate through, and I don't think replacing them is going to be something. I don't know. We'll see.
Yeah, and one of the things we've
working hand in hand.
That's right. One of the things we've kind of just, a lot of us working on these modeling tools came from the DCC tool industry more than the game dev industry, and so that's been a learning process for all of us to understand like what the differences are, and there really are a lot of differences between like a game art workflow and a like VFX workflow and stuff like that. And that is one of the things we've seen, is that like we can build tools that are sort of complementary in a lot of ways with what you would do in a DCC and then what you would do in the game environment. And some of them, are kind of the same, like you want booleans and stuff like that. But there's a lot of things, that we want Unreal to support that in a DCC would be done in a traditional DCC would be done in different ways, because they're not in this kind of like huge, you're not always working on a level, right? Whereas on Unreal, generally, you're always working on a level. Often now the levels are massive open worlds and stuff like that. And so there's just so many differences, and so many of the people want to use the modeling tools in that context. And that's really driven our development in a lot of ways, sort of pushing us towards what people are doing in Unreal, where it would help them to be able to do those kind of things directly in Unreal, versus just general purpose modeling, where you could do it anywhere.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I have to thank both of you so much for walking through these tools with us today. It's incredible stuff that we saw. And obviously, there's even so much more that we didn't have the chance to touch upon because unfortunately, there's limited time in the day and there's so much available. So this just means I'm going to have to lure you back on for another stream.
Sure, anytime.
It's the Russell and Ryan Modeling Roadshow, I guess is.
Yes.
That's right.
We'll have
take our
just
act on the road.
each week. Yeah, we'll have our own show for just this. But
I mean, it's. I was going to say, we did see a couple of questions coming up from people are, obviously seeing what the Quixel team is doing with mass and voxels, and there's a ton of stuff that I think would be great to show at some point that other teams are getting out there and showing. So
yeah, we're really
check
the
out
amateurs,
other
me and
videos.
Russell. We're, the real experts are our internal artists who've done wild stuff. So
if manager is in your title, you're not a demo guy.
well, okay, maybe I can see your point, but
yeah. I was just gonna say I just saw. Oh, sorry.
Oh no, go
I have a
ahead.
bit of lag. I was just gonna say I saw they just posted it, at least in the YouTube stream, to mentioning a forum thread for follow-up questions. And please do, if you're listening and you had questions that didn't get answered, I'll be watching the thread, and some of the people from our dev team have been watching the chat, and we'll be happy to answer questions and stuff like that after the stream.
And we do also lurk in the community forums, the Unreal Engine community forum as well. And I do lurk in Discord, periodically as well. So we're out around to try and help answer your questions and listen to everybody's feedback. And there is also a public roadmap that you can also comment on if there's other elements that you guys are really excited about. Feel free to comment on add stuff there as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Like they were saying, if anybody has more questions, because there were a ton. So I'm sure if we missed it, don't worry. There's plenty of opportunity for us to still be able to get to your questions and answer them. You can find them either on the original forum post announcement, or as they were saying, just out and about in the forum world. Please come over to our brand new sparkly and shiny community site. It's very pretty and we worked very hard on it. But with that as well, before I forget, do you mind going over the plugins that they need to turn on to enable all the stuff we did today one more time?
Sure. Switch over to my screen. So the main ones you want to turn on are modeling tools editor mode. That's going to give you the palette over to the left. Static mesh editor modeling mode is if you're used to using the static mesh editor, it's going to give you a small set of tools in there for working in there, but those are really just attribute editors and inspectors and things like that. Most of the modeling functionality is going to be in the editor mode. And then the UV editor is obviously called UV editor. And then the final one that you want to look at is called geometry script. Right here. Those are the ones you want to turn on. And then after you have those guys turned on, you can just grab stuff from should show up here in the mode selection under modeling or Shift 5. Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Well, as you saw here, Unreal Engine 5 is officially released, so if you haven't already, make sure you go download it and play with it, as well as all of these really cool geometry tools that we went through today. Make sure that you play around with it, post your progress, post any cool stuff that you make. We do look around, we do see it, and it's really cool to see the interesting and innovative stuff that people come up with. I mean, like Ryan said earlier in the stream, sometimes you guys come up with stuff that we didn't even think was possible. So,
all the time.
Yeah.
All the time.
please continue to do so and tag us at Unreal Engine on all socials so that we have a chance of seeing all your hard work. And also, don't forget to give us your feedback on our new community site that I talked about, which is dev.epicgames.com/community. A little bit of a mouthful, but it's worth it, I promise. Also, thank both of you so much for coming today and talking on the stream, talking about these tools and showing our community some of the very awesome things that are possible for them. And also, thank you to the viewers who came and watched this stream today. It would be really weird if it was just the three of us sitting here chatting for a long time with nobody involved. So your presence here is also super, super appreciated. And we post our streams in video format. So if you missed anything at any point through this stream, don't worry. We always post a video format which can be viewed on demand on our YouTube channel or on our Twitch at Unreal Engine. It saves the VOD as well. So all of those wonderful questions and answers that were in the chat are also saved along with that video. So don't worry, you won't miss out on anything. You can come back and view it whenever you want. Don't forget to keep up with us at Unreal Engine on all social media, as well as come say hi in our forums where you can get the latest news and also find all links associated with today's stream. And don't forget to tune in next week for our Fluid Sim and UE5 show as well. But
Great,
yeah,
thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Tina, everyone.